The rags scratched against Alira's skin as she walked through the gates of the moon court. She kept her eyes down, watching her bare feet move across the cold stone path. Behind her, she could hear the whispers already starting. Is that really someone's representative? What pack would send her looking like that? Alira did not answer them. She had learned, over the past year, that answering only made things worse. She pulled the torn edges of her dress closer to her body and kept walking toward the grand hall, where the presentation was about to begin. A year ago, her life had looked very different. She had belonged to a small pack in the northern hills, a place of quiet forests and simple homes. She had a mother, a father, and a life that felt safe, even if it was never wealthy. Then, during a raid from a rival pack, something valuable had gone missing from the pack's treasury. Alira had been the last person seen near that room. She had tried to explain that she was only passing through, that she had touched nothing, but no one had listened. The pack elders needed someone to blame, and she had been the easiest choice. Her own family had turned their backs on her. Her father had refused to look at her when the elders made their decision. Her mother had cried, but she had not fought for her daughter either. Alira had been cast out, left to survive on her own in the forests that bordered the capital. She had built a small shelter from branches and leaves. She had learned to catch fish in the streams and find berries that would not make her sick. It had been a hard year, but she had survived. Now, of all things, she found herself dragged back into her old pack's world because of one strange tradition. Every year, the Alpha King held a great gathering called the Presentation. Every pack in the kingdom was required to send an unmated representative, no matter their rank. It did not matter if the pack was rich or poor, powerful or weak. It was a law as old as the kingdom itself, meant to remind every pack that they answered to the crown. Alira's old pack had almost forgotten about her existence until they remembered this rule. They needed someone to send, and sending their disgraced, banished daughter was, to them, a perfect solution. It cost them nothing, and it reminded everyone of their shame in getting rid of her. They had given her the same torn dress she had been wearing when they cast her out, refusing to offer her anything better. "You'll go, and you'll stand at the back, and you'll say nothing," the pack alpha had told her coldly. "This is not an honor. This is a punishment." Alira had not argued. What was the point? She had walked for 3 days to reach the capital, sleeping under trees, drinking from streams, and ignoring the hunger in her stomach. Now she stood in the entrance of the moon court, more exhausted than she had ever been in her life. The hall inside was unlike anything she had ever seen. Marble floors gleamed under the light of 100 candles. Tall windows let in soft moonlight, mixing with the golden glow from above. Nobles and warriors from every pack in the kingdom stood in rows, dressed in silk, fur, and jewels. Beautiful wolves who had been born into wealth and comfort whispered to each other as she passed, some laughing quietly behind their hands. Alira kept walking. She found a spot at the very back of the hall, as far from the throne as possible, and lowered her head. She did not want to be seen. She only wanted this to be over, so she could return to her quiet life in the forest. At the front of the hall, on a raised platform, sat the Alpha King. King Draven Ashwolf was a name known across every corner of the kingdom, spoken with equal parts respect and fear. He had taken the throne 10 years ago after his father's death, and in that time, he had built a reputation unlike any king before him. He was strong, some said, stronger than any wolf alive. He was fair in his judgments, though he showed little warmth to anyone. And most famously, he had never shown interest in any wolf presented to him. Every year, the most beautiful and powerful women from every pack were paraded before him, hoping to catch his eye and become his queen. Every year, he sat unmoved, his expression carved from stone. Some wondered if he simply had no interest in taking a mate at all. Others whispered that perhaps his wolf had been silent for so long that he no longer felt the pull that guided most wolves to their fated partners. Today, as always, he sat on his throne with the same distant expression, watching candidate after candidate step forward. Each one was announced with her pack's name, her accomplishments, her beauty. Each one curtsied deeply, hoping for some sign of interest. Each one left the platform disappointed. Draven barely listened to the names being called. His mind wandered to matters of the kingdom, to reports of trouble along the eastern border, to anything but the parade of hopeful faces in front of him. This tradition, in his opinion, had become empty. He no longer expected anything different to happen. As the hours passed, the crowd of candidates grew thinner. The most impressive families had already had their turn. What remained were smaller packs, distant representatives, and those who had been sent almost as an afterthought. Finally, only one name remained on the list. Elira, of the Northern Hollow Pack, the announcer called out, his voice carrying none of the enthusiasm he had shown for earlier names. A murmur rippled through the hall. Some remembered the story of the Northern Hollow Pack's disgraced daughter, cast out for theft the year before. Others simply turned to look, curious about who would dare show up looking so unprepared for such an important event. Elira felt her stomach twist as she heard her name. She had hoped, somehow, that she could avoid this moment entirely. But there was no escaping it now. Slowly, she stepped forward, walking the long path toward the throne where the king sat waiting. She kept her eyes low, aware of every stare, every whisper following her steps. She could hear quiet laughter from a group of well-dressed nobles as she passed. She ignored it, focusing only on reaching the end of this long walk so she could return to the back of the hall and disappear. As she reached the space before the throne, she lowered herself into a stiff, awkward curtsy, unfamiliar with the customs of a court she had never truly been part of. She kept her head down, waiting for the king's silence, the same silence every other candidate had received. But something different happened. Draven, who had barely lifted his eyes for any candidate that day, felt something shift the moment Elira stepped onto the platform. It was as if the air itself had changed. His wolf, quiet for years, stirred violently beneath his skin, alert and restless in a way he had never experienced before. He straightened in his seat, his eyes now fully focused on the woman standing before him. Her dress was torn and stained from days of travel. Her feet were bare and dirty. Her hair was tangled from wind and rain. She looked nothing like the polished nobles who had stood before him all day. And yet, he could not look away. His wolf recognized something in her that no crown or jewel could replace. It was not her appearance that called to him. It was something deeper, something that could not be faked or dressed up in silk. A scent, a presence, a pull that told him, without question, that this woman was his. For 10 years, Draven had sat through this ceremony, feeling nothing. Today, without thinking, without permission from his own mind, his body moved. He rose from his throne. The hall fell into complete silence. Nobles who had been whispering moments before froze mid-sentence. Guards standing at the edges of the room exchanged confused glances. No one in that hall, not even the king's own advisors, had ever seen him stand for a candidate. Elira, still looking down, assumed the sudden silence meant something had gone wrong. Perhaps she had broken some rule she did not know about. Perhaps the king was about to have her removed for her appearance, an embarrassment to a ceremony meant for elegance and tradition. She braced herself, ready to be dismissed, maybe even punished for daring to stand before the throne in such a state. Instead, she heard footsteps. The king was walking down from his platform. Whispers erupted across the hall, quickly hushed by the shock of what they were witnessing. Draven walked past his guards, past his advisors, ignoring every protocol that dictated a king should never leave his throne to approach a candidate directly. He stopped in front of Elira. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself to one knee before her. Gasps filled the room. A king kneeling before anyone was almost unheard of, let alone before a woman dressed in rags, sent by a pack that clearly held no respect for her. Elira finally lifted her eyes, stunned to find the Alpha King kneeling in front of her, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Do you know what you are to me?" Draven asked, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the silent hall. Elira shook her head, too confused to speak. "You are my fated mate," he said simply. "My wolf has known it since the moment you stepped through those doors." The words hung in the air, impossible for many in the hall to believe. Nobles who had spent years trying to win the king's attention through wealth and beauty stared in disbelief as the king knelt before the very woman they had mocked only moments earlier. Among the crowd, Elira's former pack alpha stood frozen, his face pale. He had sent her here as punishment, expecting nothing more than her humiliation. Instead, He now watched as she became the center of the most important moment in the kingdom's history. "I don't understand," Elira whispered, still trying to process what was happening. "Look at me. I have nothing. I am nothing." Draven rose to his feet, standing tall before her, but his eyes remained soft. "You are wrong," he said. "What you wear does not decide your worth. I have sat through countless ceremonies, watching wolves dressed in silk and jewels, hoping their appearance would be enough to catch my interest. None of them ever did. You walked in here in torn rags, and my wolf rose the moment you crossed that door." He turned to face the crowd, his voice growing stronger, carrying across the entire hall. "Let it be known that the worth of a person is not measured by their clothing, their wealth, or their pack's name. It is measured by what lies within them. This woman, cast aside and humiliated by those who should have protected her, is my fated mate. She will be treated with the respect and honor that title demands." The Northern Hollow Pack's Alpha attempted to step forward, perhaps to explain himself, but Draven's sharp glance silenced him instantly. "I know the story of how you treated her," Draven said, his voice cold now as he addressed the Pack Alpha directly. "You will answer for the cruelty shown to her. A council will review the circumstances of her banishment, and if I find that she was wrongly accused and unjustly cast out, there will be consequences for your pack." The Alpha lowered his head, unable to meet the king's eyes. Draven then turned back to Elira, his expression softening once more. He removed his own cloak, a rich, dark fabric lined with silver thread, and gently placed it over her shoulders, covering the torn rags she had worn since childhood memories of shame. "You will never wear rags again," he said quietly, just for her to hear. "Not because silk makes you worthy, but because no one should ever be made to feel small for something they did not deserve." Elira felt tears rising in her eyes, overwhelmed by the sudden change in her fortune, by kindness, after a year of cruelty and loneliness. She had come to this court expecting nothing but more humiliation. Instead, she found herself standing beside a king who saw her, truly saw her, without needing silk or jewels to prove her value. Draven offered his hand, and after a moment of hesitation, Elira took it. Together, they walked from the hall, leaving behind a room full of stunned faces and hushed whispers that would soon spread across every pack in the kingdom. The story of the girl in rags, who had made the Alpha King rise from his throne, would be told for generations, a reminder that fate cared nothing for wealth or appearance, only for the heart it had already chosen. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, Elira looked up at the moon, bright and full above them. For the first time in over a year, she felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them not as an outcast, but as a queen who had been chosen not for her name or her clothing, but simply for who she was.